Hello, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. It's the end of the road for ShotSpotter.
It's an ineffective tool.
The gunshot detection technology will be dismantled starting Sunday. The mayor says he won't let a corporation prey on Chicagoans' fears about crime. But residents in high-violence neighborhoods say they need every tool.
The detection is working. It's detecting that bullets are flying and that they're coming,
causing an historic standoff between the mayor and the city council. This as a new front opens in the fight for the future of Chicago public schools, as Illinois marks 1 year without cash bail.
And what we've seen in the 1 year that we've been doing this is that we've not seen an increase in crime, which a lot of detractors were trying to use as a cudgel.
Meanwhile, the CTA says cash is what it needs above all else.
If you want to have a world-class transit system, you have to be prepared to pay for it.
And it's a hung jury in the latest big corruption case that strikes at Springfield's culture. What it could mean for former Speaker Michael Madigan's trial that's just weeks away. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Rima Amin with Chalkbeat Chicago, Mariah Wolfel of WBEZ, Hannah Meisel with Capital News Illinois, and Chip Mitchell also with WBEZ. Thanks so much. And Rima, we're going to begin with you because some breaking news today in that we known that there was tension between Mayor Brandon Johnson and head of Chicago Public Schools Pedro Martinez, but now it's official that the mayor wants Martinez gone. What do you know?
Yeah, so multiple news outlets reporting, including us today, that this week, specifically on Wednesday, the mayor called Martinez into his office and asked him to resign. Martinez said no.
Awkward.
Yeah, and I believe the Sun-Times and BEZ are actually reporting that he is waiting to see how the Chicago Board of Education is going to react, whether they're going to back him or not. But it is increasingly seeming like the board, might not be on his side.
Might not stick with Martinez,
yes,
although they have.
Right, and previously they were kind of sticking with him. We had sources telling us that they also backed his, insistence to not take out a short-term loan, which the mayor had insisted on to kind of pay and for some of the district's financial woes. But it seems that maybe he's losing the board's backing here.
Why? What changed?
So there's been pressure for, as you mentioned, for a while now, for months. Right now, we are in the middle of CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union contract negotiations. Mayor Brandon Johnson is a very close ally of CTU. He used to work for the union, and negotiations have gotten pretty tense. The CTU has a very extensive package of proposals, extensive and expensive. The mayor's office, as I mentioned, has pushed the district to take out a loan to help cover some of those costs, in addition to some pension payments. The district has said no. They also, adopted a budget that closed a very large deficit, but also, resulted in some cuts, and the mayor was not happy about that either.
Well, but explain this to me, Mariah. What is Johnson's specific issue with Martinez here, and why would the board go with the mayor? He appoints him, but they don't have to follow his orders when they've disagreed with him in terms of what he wants to happen with the CPS budget.
I think a big sticking point is this $175 million pension payment that is burning a hole in the city's budget this year. There's a $223 million budget gap that the city has to close for 2024, notwithstanding the nearly $1 billion budget gap we're staring down for next year. And this is a piece of the pension payment of municipal employees that former Mayor Lori Lightfoot shifted the burden onto CPS to pay. And in kind of a shocking rebuke of Johnson, the CPS did not include that in their budget for this year. And so this is a huge sticking point, and I think it really, on top of, well,
but that answers the question as to why the mayor would want Martinez gone. I'm confused as to what happened with the Board of Education members.
It's not totally clear at this point, what's shifting with the board. What we do know is that when the mayor did make that request for that short-term loan, the board seemed to agree with Martinez and CPS leadership in saying that, this doesn't feel like a fiscally responsible move. And so they kind of stuck with him. But this is just me kind of reading the tea leaves. It seems that maybe with pressure mounting and with these contract negotiations kind of, not moving as fast as they had hoped, it's possible that the board is now kind of caving and thinking maybe we should go in another direction.
Yes.
And the board, which is appointed by the mayor as well. And I think it would be easier for us to give you an answer if board members were speaking publicly about their positions on some of these more controversial policies. But so far, I mean, today from our reporting, all we have is that a senior aide in the mayor's office has said the board is no longer with Martinez on some of these larger issues, and kind of trying to paint that. But it's hard to fact check that without board members kind of speaking openly about their position.
No, they're not responding to phone calls or anything like that, at least for us too.
Wow, I mean, it's just a major school district and its leadership, so, don't do any of
deal.
those calls back. I know that neither of you specifically cover CPS or education, but I'm sort of going to give this to the table. Is there any way that this backfires on the mayor, this very public now push to oust Martinez?
Well, I think that's a big question, is whether the board is going to back the mayor. And if the board does not back the mayor in his wishes for the resignation of the CPS CEO, who has historically, I mean, since 1995, served at the pleasure of the board, but really at the pleasure of the mayor that appoints the board, that would be stunning politically. And so I think it's kind of a game of wait and see. Does Martinez accept the resignation and then therefore forgo his severance package? Does he require the board to fire him with or without cause? Without cause, they'd be in the hole for nearly $200,000 in severance package, or with cause, and then they open themselves up to a lawsuit, which Martinez, could sue over, termination for cause if he disagrees with that, which I'm sure he would disagree that he deserves to be fired.
He's been pretty adamant thus far that he wants to keep his job. Now, let's move on, because another big move by Mayor Johnson this week, and that is canceling ShotSpotter. That's the technology chip that alerts police of the sound of gunshots, and it will be gone starting this weekend. What does that mean for the city, Chip?
Yeah, starting Sunday, in fact, and that would fulfill a campaign promise going back a year and a half that Brandon Johnson, the mayor, made to pull the plug. But some city council members on Wednesday tried to compel his administration to extend this contract, and it's a very interesting block on the council now that I don't know if this will be something that outlives this particular debate, but you have some long-standing supporters of the police department and the police union for pretty much anything, together with several Black and Latino alderpersons, not all of them, but they actually voted for an ordinance that they had, what was it, 33 to 14. So it's a lot of alders on this particular issue lined up against the mayor.
Not unanimous by any means, but fairly resounding. Let's actually take a listen to a bit of that debate and the back and forth in the city council.
Do for me, but not for thee. That's what we're talking about here today. You somehow know better than what we, the 34 and indeed 36, Mr. President, that support a continuation of something in our communities, that the 16 know better than we do.
I think sound thinking is a shoddy business. I think when they first came in, they said it was going to reduce violence, it was going to increase convictions. It did not do that. Just removing it and not having any answer at all is frightening.
So before we move on to the political dynamics at play, well, I don't know that we can fully separate that, but we'll get to the veto in just a moment. But Mariah, first, can you just talk about what Johnson's reasoning is beyond the campaign pledge he's fulfilling?
Well, I think there's two prongs here. One, I think on principle, Johnson believes that technology like ShotSpotter leads to the over-policing in Black and brown communities. And he references the death of 13-year-old Adam Toledo, where police responded to that scene based on a ShotSpotter call. So there's that, theoretical argument. And then Johnson has shifted as mayor to say that actually this technology has been proven to be ineffective. And, we're paying millions of dollars on a technology that doesn't lead to more gun prosecutions, citing, a study by the Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox, and that money could be better spent on tools that prevent violence. And so there's two prongs to Johnson's opposition to this.
And Chip, you've also done some reporting in terms of 911 response.
Yeah, this week I interviewed an economist who poured through data, collected a lot of data on many years of the ShotSpotter program here in Chicago, and he found that this technology actually slows down police responses to 911 calls. So in other words, you have human beings in distress calling saying, I need the cops, we got something going on here, gunshots. Those calls are getting answered more slowly now than before this technology came in with artificial intelligence, where cops are responding to these sensors, these acoustic sensors thingies with artificial intelligence.
As the mayor had called them, walkie-talkies on sticks.
Yeah, right.
Now, Maria, some of the counter argument had been that people in high crime neighborhoods say they need every possible tool, every mechanism, especially and at least until there is a replacement. So beyond this being done on Sunday, what is the plan?
Yeah, so they're going to be decommissioned on Sunday, and that technology will start to be taken down. And then the mayor is looking for requests from other gunshot detection technology. And so they're going to go through this requests for information, for proposals process. And the mayor says his intention is to contract with another form of technology. And so it's kind of contradictory to his overall argument that technology like this leads to the over-policing.
Right. Explain that.
But you shift and you change from campaigning to governing, and that might just be one of those inflection points for him. We'll just have to see. And he's not ruling out recontracting with ShotSpotter, though that would be a long shot. But you go through this formal request for proposals, request for information process, and see what you get back. You try to negotiate the best deal, and that's what the mayor says he's going to take months to do. There is a transition period from now through November that they'll work with the police department to transition away from using the technology.
And what will each of you be watching? The mayor, when questioned, said he doesn't necessarily have a timeline. The timeline is however long it takes to get it right. Hannah?
Well, something like this, like putting out another RFP and waiting for responses and vetting all of these candidates, that could take a very, very long time. And by the time a process like that is basically cooked, who knows what kind of environment we're going to be in. Who knows what the demand might be. It might be something that is just put on the back burner and is permanently left on the back burner.
Right, well, and go ahead, Jeff.
Well, this company, Sound Thinking, they've appeared before a city council committee, and they're saying starting Sunday, we're going to start to take the equipment down. So it could be very costly if the city actually tried to backtrack and keep ShotSpotter as days and weeks and months pass. And another thing, it's not at all clear that there is another company that could put up anything like ShotSpotter. So what kind of technology are they talking about?
So, Mariah, you wanted to cut in
Well,
there.
I'm just saying, most immediately, we're looking to whether the mayor is going to veto this proposal. He says he's intended to veto it. He calls it illegal. The city's corporation council says it's a violation of the Separation of Powers Act, that the legislative branch can't compel the executive branch to enter into a contract. This might play out during budget season. Aldermen might try to, earmark funding for ShotSpotter in that budget process, but I think we have a long way to go. In order to veto, Johnson has to hold a city council meeting where he will issue the veto. City council members can then vote to override, and they were just one vote short of the veto-proof majority. And so if they
Although
decide,
he says even if they do, it's illegal.
And so it almost, a court fight. Do we see a court fight?
Aside from all of that, put this in perspective. How historic is the fact that we even could be seeing a veto and potential for an override?
Well, it is historic. The last mayoral veto we saw was in 2006 when Richard Daley vetoed an ordinance that would require big box retailers to pay their employees more. And in Chicago, this, mayors don't have to issue vetoes often because they have so much control over what legislation comes up for a vote in the first place through controlling chair appointments, chairmanships. And so it would be a very big deal to see, Johnson issue a veto on this.
Johnson seemed to bristle really at the notion as well that his relationship with the city council is rocky despite this vote, despite questions over sort of where he's at with CPS and ties to the CTU, and then also really didn't seem to appreciate when a reporter said you pivoted from choosing your zoning chair. So, Maria, stick with you on this. Just your thoughts. Is this a rocky relationship, or, as the mayor says, is this just change and a different set of values than to which Chicago's accustomed?
I think when you line up all of these different instances, they have their own unique nuances that make them, contentious and controversial in the city council. But the fact that we're seeing so many of them, I think, is indicative of someone who's never held executive office before and who is kind of learning as we go how to play politics with the city council. In the ShotSpotter instance, the mayor gets to his majority in city council through allies in the Black Caucus and progressives on the council. And in this case, allies in the Black Caucus are very pro-ShotSpotter and want, some of them. Others, like Alderman Jason Irvin, are not. And so there's not consensus in the way. And so you see what I'm saying? Like, you can kind of tease out nuances from each of these, though, I think we should all take the point that it's been rocky in different ways, including the committee chairmanship.
There's another political dynamic that could play out as well. When ShotSpotter is decommissioned starting on Sunday, there will be shooting deaths in which nobody called 911. And there will be publicity about those shooting deaths.
Nobody calls because they didn't hear it?
They didn't hear it because people they don't trust the police, right? Exactly. So those will get publicity, and there could be a political toll that Johnson will pay, and it'll be drip, 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 drip. So we'll have to see how that plays out as well.
I also want to point out, what I thought was interesting about your interview was the researcher said that, in an ideal world where the police had the resources that they needed, ShotSpotter would be an excellent asset, to
sort of supplemental?
Yes, a supplemental thing. But in this world, like you said, when police are sending resources to ShotSpotter events that turn out to not be anything, then yes, you're putting resources away from real events.
It's a police department of scarcity.
Right, which is the broader context in which a lot of these things play out.
And we're continuing to see, I know the mayor continually pointing out he wants to hire and plans to hire more detectives, but that's not necessarily going to be enough to fill that gap, Chip.
Well, we'll have to see.
All right. Well, let's move on to ethics. And Hannah, a hung jury in the case against former AT&T executive Paul Sciazza, who he was charged for a scheme in which he allegedly bribed former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan to get a law passed in Springfield by hiring a Madigan ally to lobby, but not actually lobby.
Right. It's not your classic envelope of cash. In fact, that's not really. What the word that was used over and over again in this 2-week trial was, was much more sophisticated than that. So the allegation is that, yes, AT&T gave basically a no-work contract to a 20-year veteran of the Illinois House after he'd retired in 2017, ally of Madigan, and in a time when AT&T finally saw an opening to pass their major legislation to end the 1930s era obligation to maintain these old copper wires that they felt like were holding them back from investing in things like broadband and cellular. And so in these 4 days of testimony, we saw, more than a dozen witnesses. And it was really, really interesting to see that the first note that the jury sent out, they had gotten the case on Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday morning, they sent out a note to the judge asking something very specific about whether to prove a bribe, you have to actually, get the thing that.
Is it the offer or is it the gift?
And so it turns out, they hung. They couldn't reach any sort of resolution even after the judge sent them back yesterday to try again.
What is this? One juror holding out.
It was just one juror. Credit to my colleagues at the Tribune who had tracked down a juror that would actually divulge what happened in the jury room. And they were caught up in the idea that, the intent was not there. And so if Paul Sciazza had intended to bribe, but, his defense all along was like, this was just a blip on the radar, and a request came in. Yes, it came in from a very close confidant of Mike Madigan, but it did not connect in their minds to the legislation that they were trying to pass, and the jury found that convincing.
So are they going to try again?
Well, the parties are going to meet in front of the judge on Tuesday to decide next steps forward, which could include a retrial. But if that does happen, likely it wouldn't be scheduled until probably next year, because the next big thing on the docket is Mike Madigan's own bribery and racketeering
we'll all
trial.
Be watching that, of course. So former House Speaker.
A couple weeks from now.
What does this mean for Madigan? Anybody?
It could mean a lot, or it could mean nothing. I think it's a lot depends on the specific group of 12 people who are in the jury room. You know, the Tribune had
could be that one
confirmed,
juror
yes.
again.
And so, you know, if, you know, maybe it was a different group of people, it wouldn't have ended that way. You know, there's a lot more, though, in the case of Mike Madigan. There's many, many more counts. And you have not just the bribery, but it's also the racketeering charges.
Well, we will all be watching that soon. I know, Hannah, you'll be in the courtroom. Now, Chip, it has been a year since Illinois passed a law that, well, not since passed a law, but since implemented a law that completely eliminates cash bail. How's that going?
Well, jail populations, for one thing, are down, not as much as maybe a lot of people expected. Here in Cook County, we're down only out of about we're down to about 5,000, just a tad over 5,000. That's only less than 400 less than we had a year ago. So millions of dollars have been saved in communities that otherwise would have been spent on bond. A lot of that money lost, not finding its way back to the families. Some Loyola University researchers are studying 21 counties, the most exhaustive study that's going on. In the first 6 months after cash bail's elimination, they counted $6.7 million in avoided bond costs in those counties. Warrants for failure to appear in court decreased slightly, and crime has not shot up. This is the big warning that a lot of people in the law enforcement world, prosecutors, sheriffs, the police unions, they were warning that we'd have all these murderers out and that crime would shoot up. That has not happened. Now, in fact, violent crime and property crime have continued to come down. There's not a causal relationship, but there was not a big surge in crime as a result of eliminating cash bail in Illinois.
And what are your takeaways, Rima? Because this is something that, as Chip alluded to, really detractors had said, the sky is truly falling.
Yeah, and you kind of hear that, I feel like, in other communities that toy with this idea or consider it. And it was very interesting to read that, you know, it's true that the sky is not falling, that, you know, really you don't have, you know, the streets overridden with violent criminals. And I mean, I also thought it was really interesting just learning about how, you know, prosecutors still do have the option of asking a judge to detain a violent, you know, allegedly violent offender. I didn't know that. And that actually in like, what, 60% of those instances, judges have said, yes, okay,
yeah,
fine.
Judges can seek, prosecutors can petition for it, and then there's an argument about it now, and then the judge has the final word. Is this defendant pre-trial a threat to public safety or a threat to flee and not keep court appointments? And so it's been, you know, most people in the system, including prosecutors, say that it's working pretty well, and they've been working it out.
Though not all, Hannah, right? We have some prosecutors who say that the list of offenses that you prosecutors are able to ask a judge to detain someone too short?
Yeah, and that's been a constant for, I don't know, it's been, what, 2 years since we even touched the Safety Act to, you know, amend that to add to that list, but not enough to satisfy some of those prosecutors. But, you know, I mean, I think it's now been almost 4 years since General Assembly passed this. It's been a year, of course, since the part of this, you know, cashless,
the elimination of cash bail portion. Mm-hmm.
But, you know, from the beginning, it's been a failure of communication. You know, the communication plan was not there from the beginning. I think there was a lot of folks who were understandably very confused and upset. I think, you know, it's our colleagues in the media, you know, not all of us did the best job of communicating it, but I think it came from the folks who were trying to put this out. They did not have the most solid communication plan. And so it goes back to that when, you know, when it's almost 4 years later and people are still confused. People still don't understand what it is.
Well, thank you for communicating those concerns. As I tell my husband, communication. It all comes down to that in policy and in personal life. We are out of time. Our thanks to Rima Amin, Mariah Wolfel, Hannah Meisel, and Chip Mitchell. We will be back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown, and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family. The Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that is our show for this Friday night. Looks like we're in store for a sunny Saturday. So head to our website, check out our picks for outdoor adventures this weekend. And tonight, the new series of Chicago stories kicks off, and this week's episode explores the deadly alliance between Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb and their efforts to commit the, quote, perfect crime. Didn't go that way. That's tonight at 8 or anytime at WTTW.com/Chicago Stories. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thanks so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night. Now, Mariah, we talked a lot about what went on in the city. What we haven't talked about is the mayor won't share whether or not he's going to accept a pay increase.
Yeah, it's pretty silly because this is going to come out in October. It's a FOIA-able information of whether or not city officials are taking this 4.1% increase. But, you know, it's a controversial story. Public officials get dinged for, you know, taking these pay increases in light of a budget hole, and so maybe it's just like, let's just delay, you know, the
putting
negative
off the
press
inevitable
until
I don't know.
But similar thing, you know, every year a similar thing happens in Springfield because I guess a quirk. I should know this like much better from all the years covering
you
it.
got
But
it
like
down.
a quirk of, you know.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to give back to its community in Chicago and beyond.